everyone. So in this lecture, we're going to go over just the kind of basic definitions that we are going to need to understand in order to be successful in this course. So let's first start with what communication is. Communication, as defined in your textbook, is the process of generating meaning by sending and receiving verbal and nonverbal symbols and signs that are influenced by multiple contexts. So take a look at this picture here. All of these people live within their own communication, right? And the communication that we send to each other has its own circle. This is sending and receiving verbal and non-symbols. These little circles represent our own influence and our multiple context. Okay? So when you think of communication, I want you to think of this web of people and how they're all connected, right? Even though they live in their own worlds. The web part is the communication. It's the messages. It's the sending and receiving. Okay? So communication in a nutshell is just the way or how we make meaning of the world around us. Now, communication studies is the academic discipline that deals with that meaning making, okay? It's the looking at and studying the behavior of people and the patterns that people use to communicate in both, interpersonal relationships and social interactions and different cultures, how we all communicate with one another. As a communication studies academic, you study the changes in people's communication and how they make meanings. And we'll go over a little bit more about what verbal and nonverbal communication is and what it looks like. So, where did communication come from? Communication has been around for a very long time. It actually started with the Greek philosophers like Aristotle and Plato, right? They had this rich tradition of studying rhetoric, and rhetoric refers to just the study of speaking well and persuasively. We go over persuasive speaking more towards the end of the term, but rhetoric is going to be with us throughout the entire semester. Because rhetoric, again, just refers to speaking well and persuasively. All right. Now, even though we've been studying communication since Aristotle, the actual discipline has not been accepted into academic departments until the 1900s. And for a long time, there weren't very many people that studied it. But today, we have thousands of different disciplines and thousands of people that study it today. It's actually one of the top majors in America. And that's because everything we interact with, whether it's our friend or our favorite sports team, has an effect on our communication patterns and how we communicate. So let's dive a little bit more into rhetoric. Now, the study of rhetoric is typically focused on persuasion, right? It's usually in topics of public communication, like public speaking. It's usually in regards to debates and laws and policies. Rhetoric is usually used in courts, right? We like to use rhetoric. We like to bring in this very well-spoken person for us when we're in trouble, right? Like a lawyer. A lawyer. And these people, intend to praise or blame, right? That's all rhetoric. Now, the connection among rhetoric and policymaking and legal proceedings show that communication and citizenship have been connected since the study of communication began. So what does that mean? That means the better you are at speaking, the better you are at communicating, the more power you have as a person. And it helps us make policy, right? We all agree that something is bad. And so we all agree to make a law that says you can't do that bad thing. That is rhetoric in a nutshell. Now, rhetoric is really powerful. It could either be powerful for the right reasons or it could be powerful for the wrong reasons. In recent years, rhetoric has been a hot, trendy term that's been associated with misleading and negative information. Okay. Something I love about communication studies is that it helps us make sense of things that are happening right now. So I want you to think back to about 3 years ago. Okay. 4 years ago, the last election, we saw a lot of rhetoric. Okay. We especially saw a lot of rhetoric that was being associated with misleading and negative information. It was a conversation we heard nonstop 4 years ago, and we still continue to hear it today. But as communication majors, right, as people who are studying communication studies, we know that rhetoric can also be very positive. It can be used for the greater good, such as making policy or making laws. So in this class, we in-depthly graze into the 5 main communication disciplines, I guess you can call them. The first one being intrapersonal communication, the next one being interpersonal communication, and then we have group communication, public communication, which is also called public speaking, and then mediated communication is a newer form or discipline of study. It's also called mass communication. It's all about media. It's about technology and communication. So let's begin by diving into intrapersonal communication. Intrapersonal communication is the communication with oneself using internal vocalization or reflective thinking. It is the conversations we have in our head. Okay. It's our self-conscious. It's our self-talk, our self-concept, our self-love, our self-care, our self-reflection. It takes place only inside our head, and that's what makes interpersonal communication completely different from every other form. Your interpersonal communication is only within yourself. It's your confidence, it's your self-awareness, your stress management, your decision-making. It influences our relationships with people. Okay. And what I mean by that is inside ourselves, right? We have this little voice that tells us who we are and who we could hang out with, right? So if I want to join a club or a group, I have to have already seen myself as a member of that group. Okay. That's how interpersonal communication affects your relationships. Because inside, you talk to yourself and you say, oh yeah, I could be friends with that person. I could be like a surfboarder if I want. I can do that. It's your confidence. Okay. Now, interpersonal communication, although it's inside our head, right? Although it's our own self, it can be triggered by some internal and external stimulus. Okay. Again, going back to the relationships, right? So if I want to be a surfboarder, I have to have that self-confidence enough in myself right? I have to see myself as a surfer before I can join the group. Now, on the other end, if I'm friends with a bunch of people that are surfboarders and I'm hanging out with them and I'm learning their lingo all the time, I then become a surfer myself because I'm associated with those people. So that's intrapersonal. Now the opposite, or not so much, yeah, it's the opposite. The opposite of intrapersonal is interpersonal communication. Now, this is the communication between people whose lives mutually influence one another, and it typically occurs in dyads. Dyads is a funny, fancy way of saying pairs, okay? It's the communication usually between two people. It builds, maintains, and ends our relationships. It can either be planned or unplanned. It's one of the more structured forms of communication, as it's influenced by social expectations and expectations rather than our intrapersonal communication. The biggest difference I want to stress here is that interpersonal is way more goal-oriented than intrapersonal because it fulfills instrumental and relational needs. And we'll talk about that a little bit more into the semester. But for now, what I want you to think of is a relationship, okay? When we have a relationship with someone, especially a romantic relationship, we have expectations, right? We also have needs. So think about this planned sort of communication, right? Which helps us maintain our relationships, almost like text messages, right? When you're in a romantic relationship, especially today's age, we expect to have a good morning text, right? Now, a good morning text is a way of having planned interpersonal communication. Every morning, I'm going to text this person good morning, right? That's how I'm going to show my interest to that person, is by sending a good morning text, okay? Now, that good morning text is goal-oriented, right? I'm staying connected to this person via text message, but it's one person receiving that interpersonal message, okay? And on the same end, a breakup text, right? That's ending our relationship. That is violating an expectation. If you're used to every morning your partner texting you good morning, and then one morning they text you, hey, this is over, I'm breaking up with you, that ends the interpersonal relationship. So the biggest takeaway from here is that interpersonal communication can be planned, right? And it is goal-oriented and influenced by our social expectations and our culture. Think of a text message between you and your significant other. So moving on. Group communication occurs when 3 or more people communicate to achieve a shared goal. So the biggest difference here between interpersonal and group communication is that interpersonal is in dyads. Again, dyads is just a fancy way of saying two. There's one sender and one receiver. In a group, we have 3 or more people talking to one another. This is like group projects. Now, a group is a collection of people sharing some type of common interest, right? And one goal. Now, there are many different types of groups. We have an open group, right? This is when anyone can join. So let's say you're at Costco right? And you stop at the sample table and you're like, wow, this Texas toast is really good. And you're talking to the person who's sitting there and preparing the samples. And you're like, wow, this Texas toast is so good. Has anyone else tried this? And then someone else walks up and they pick up the little sample cup and they go, oh my gosh, this is so good. And then you guys are all talking together about the sample, right? And then another person can join, and then another person can join, right? All these people then start swarming over to the sample table to try some toast. That's an open group. That's when anyone can join at any moment, at any time. Now, a closed group is usually membership based. So think of it as like a fraternity or sorority, right? This is a group of people that pay a membership and it's closed, right? It's the same 53 people talking together. Another example of a closed group would be like the class of 2002. It's everyone in your high school that graduated with you. It's a closed group. Now, peer-to-peer group is a little harder to understand, right? Because in a peer-to-peer group, you have to have equal status. Everyone in the group has to kind of be at an equal status. So think of it like being in a class, being in a traditional classroom, and you're told that you have to do a group project with the people next to you. You get into the group and you start your project. That is peer-to-peer group. Even though some of you may be seniors and some of you may be sophomores and some of you may be freshmen, you are still peer-to-peer because you are all students within that classroom. So peer-to-peer is usually like a department, right? It's everyone that does something together. Everyone has equal status. Now, the last type of group is hierarchical group. This is one or more members are distinguished from the rest. Think of that as like Amazon, okay? Amazon's this really big business. Jeff Bezos is at the top, right? But everyone else is under him, but they all still have to work together in order to get your package shipped to you by tomorrow. A hierarchical group is when one person is distinguished from the rest. And those people are usually the ones that are trickling information down to the other members in the group. All the people in a hierarchical group still have the same goal. It's just one person tends to be the leader. All right, now my favorite type of communication is public communication, also known as public speaking. Now, public communication is sender focused. And what that means is the person who's giving the message out, the person who's talking, is usually responsible for conveying information to an audience. Okay, it's very structured. It's the most formal and goal-oriented form of communication. Now, I know we talked about group communication being goal-oriented and interpersonal communication being goal-oriented. The difference there is that public speaking's goal orientation is related to the information they're trying to spread to multiple people, not so much as having a shared conversation or having a need that needs to be satisfied for yourself. It is just information or persuasion to a whole group of people. Now, public speaking, public communication is the most stressful out of all the other forms of communication. And this is because of anxiety and fear. Lots of people are scared of public speaking, right? Lots of people have stage fright. And it's because you're one person talking with a whole bunch of other people staring at you. Okay. Moving on. Mass communication. Think of mass communication like a group text message, right? This is when messages are sent to a large audience using print or electronic media. So again, like a group text message with all your friends. If you're like, hey, for my birthday, we're going to Chuck E. Cheese. You put that in the group text message so everyone in your friend group gets the same message. Now, if you were just to text your friend Beth and be like, hey, Beth, Chuck E. Cheese for my birthday this year, that's interpersonal because it's a dyad. You could also think about mass communication as a billboard. Okay, here I have a billboard from the Grinch. Stop moving to Los Angeles, it's full. It's a billboard for the Grinch, right? It's mass communication. It's sending out a message of, hey, stop moving here and see the Grinch. Now, electronic media, right? Media, we tend to associate it with like social media, right? Some type of electronics that we use, but that's not always true. Media can be television, websites, billboards, blogs, social media, newspapers, books, a pamphlet. All of that is considered mass communication. Now, how do you know it's mass communication versus interpersonal communication? It usually has technology. And again, technology does not mean it has batteries or is plugged into the wall. Technology could just mean a new way of communicating, right? The radio, that's technology. Books, that's technology. And that's what distinguishes it from all other forms of communication. The only problem with mass communication is that there's no immediate verbal or nonverbal feedback, okay? When you have a billboard out to spread a message about something or spread awareness, you're not receiving immediate feedback as you would if you if you were talking to your mom about something, right? You'd get immediate feedback. You'd see her nodding. I myself study media communication. I specifically study sports media. And that's just a fancy way of saying I study how sports are influenced in our media, right? How it shapes our culture and our society. Okay. And this is because scholars who focus on mass communication and media are often take a critical approach in order to examine how media shapes our culture and society. And that typically includes various mediated messages. Okay, that means so for example, I look at Twitter accounts of people talking about sports. I look at billboards and commercials, and I listen to the radio and I read blogs and I watch podcasts all about sports to understand how our culture is shaped by sports media. The communication process, the video is not working on here, so you are actually going to watch this video yourself in the next step of your module for the week. But the communication process is a very simple 7-step process that we use every day without even knowing it. Moving forward, we're going to talk about principles, or the why, right? Why do we have all this type of information? Why do we have all this type of communication? What does this do, right? Why study? So we increase our knowledge of communication by improving our communication skills. And we do this because it's very effective in academics, professional, personal, and civic lives, okay? We want to be strong communicators because it helps us be stronger leaders. Research shows that students who study communication and improve our communication skills are less likely to drop out of school and are more likely to have a higher grade point average, right? And this is because we learn how to speak effectively. We learn how to share our ideas effectively depending on how we need it, right? We also understand how our culture is affected by it. Communication is guided by our culture and our context. What I like to think about there, what I like you to think about is slang. Okay, we'll talk about language a little bit more later, but let's think about slang for a second. Slang is, jargon, short terms, usually associated with the youth of the country, right? Our slang, our jargon is in our culture, right? I understand one thing and someone else understands it as something else because our cultures are different. Our rules and our norms influence our routines and rituals within communication as well, right? So, for example, in America, right, we like to use the word freedom a lot, okay? Now, freedom in America means something different than it would somewhere else in the world, okay? Our routines, our rituals within our communication surrounding freedom is similar to the Pledge of Allegiance. We say the Pledge of Allegiance in elementary school, right? In other cultures, they don't do that. But it's our routine as Americans to say they pledge allegiance in the morning. Every day, K through 12. Okay? That's normal to us. If someone from another culture walked into the middle of an elementary school classroom while saying the Pledge of Allegiance, they might be a little confused. Okay? It's not their norm, it's not their routine, it's not their ritual. But our Pledge of Allegiance is our way of recognizing freedom every day. Communication competence is the ability to achieve communicative goals in a socially appropriate manner. Competent communicators have cognitive knowledge about communication based on observation and instruction, understand that individual, social, and cultural contexts affect competence, and be able to adapt to those various contexts. Levels of competence include unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and unconscious competence. We'll go over that later in the semester, but for now, what I want you to think of when I say communication competence is a little kid's birthday party. Now, a little kid's birthday party is always fun, right? There's always pizza, there's always cake, there's always, kids around, right? And everyone's having fun celebrating little Timmy's birthday. But let's say you're at that party and you want to talk about Santa Claus not being real. Is talking about Santa Claus not being real the best place to have that conversation at a kid's party? Is a kid's party the best place to have a conversation about Santa not being real? No, right? Our communication competence says, hey, social clues here, right? Cultural context here. There's little kids around. We shouldn't talk about Santa not being real. Okay? That is what communication competence is. That's an example of it. It's being aware, being self-aware of where you're at, right? What the social norms are, what the social custom is, what the cultural context is, and being able to decide interpersonally if that's the best place to have that communication. I dive into that a little bit more too in the second video that you will watch today. Now, there's 4 types of communication competence. In order to develop competence, you have to become a more mindful communicator and a higher self-monitor. Again, going back to talking about Santa Claus at a kid's party. We have to be self-aware. We have to self-monitor. We have to be like, hey, you know what? Wrong place. There's a better place to talk about that. Now, your unconscious incompetence is that you are unaware of the skill and your lack of proficiency. Okay, this is when you walk into something, you're just talking, even though you have no idea what you're talking about. And then we have conscious incompetence. That's when you are aware of the skill, but you are not yet proficient, right? That's when you walk into a room and you're like, I know what to do. I know what to say. And then you have conscious competence, and that's when you are able to use your skill, but only with effort. And unconscious competence is performing the skill becomes automatic. So we start when we learn communication, right? We start learning the norms. We start at being unaware and not knowing how to use it. And we end up getting to a point where we do it without even knowing. Think of like learning a new language. We start with incompetence, and at some point we'll become competent in it. Communication apprehension is just the fear we experience due to real or imagined communication with another person or persons. Communication apprehension is both a physiological response and a physiological response. So, psychological response includes increased self-conscious, irrational fears, lack of confidence, or a negative attitude. And physiological responses include rapid heart rate, sweating, dry mouth, hyperventilation, and butterflies in the stomach. This is when we become apprehensive to say something or to talk to someone, right? It's just based off of your experience, right? Or your fear, whether it be real or not. So your key takeaways for the week. Communication helps us define meaning in all aspects of life. For your discussion, you will be asked to define communication studies in your own terms. There are 5 forms of communication that we stress, which are intrapersonal, interpersonal, group communication, public communication, and mass communication. The 7 steps of the communication process are explained in the next video. By the end of that video, you will know the 7 steps of the communication process. We must be self-aware to be competent communicators, right? And psychological condition that we can overcome by practicing and studying communication. That's the end of this video. Go ahead and hop on over to the communication process video to understand more about the 7-step process. And I look forward to our discussion this week. See you guys later. Bye.